Hi ladies and gentlemen, Krzysztof the Polish Geek welcomes you to another video, a ranking video, because with Toy Story 5 out, I decided that now is the best time to rank all 5 Toy Story movies from my least favorite to my very favorite. Again, now that Toy Story 5 is out, there couldn't be a better time for that than now, because Toy Story is a franchise is very much my childhood. I mean, there are several franchises that very much describe my childhood, and Toy Story is very much one of them. Like, when I was a little kid, I was watching the very first original Toy Story on VHS quite a lot, and then Toy Story 2 came out in theaters when I was like around 5 years old, 5, 6, don't exactly remember, but yeah, Toy Story 2 came out in theaters, and I remember how me and my whole family went to see this movie. It was actually the second movie I ever seen in theaters, actually, Toy Story 2. Like, the first one was Asterix and Obelix Take on Caesar. That was my very first movie I ever seen in theaters, but Toy Story 2 was the very second one, and I still remember how I loved it back then, thought it was better, and then after it came out on VHS, like, me and my family were frequently watching it almost every day. And then, when I was like in my mid-teens, 15 years old, that's when Toy Story 3 came out, and it instantly became my favorite one very easily, and what I loved about it is how much it respected its old audience, something that cannot be said for vast majority of modern movies. But what made Toy Story 3 so amazing, actually we'll get to it in the actual ranking. And then I thought that the trilogy was complete and there was no need for more. I mean, subconsciously I kind of was hoping for a Toy Story 4 because I loved it. I loved all the previous 3 so much, but objectively it was complete. And then Toy Story 4 came out, and actually, enough. I gave you enough of my backstory with Toy Story. Time to get on with the actual ranking, because you will learn all that information when I start ranking all 5 of those movies. So let's get to the ranking, because number 5 is Toy Story 4. And yes, when I first watched it in theaters, I thought it was quite good. I didn't consider it necessarily... Oh no, actually, now that I remember, when I first watched it, I thought it was as good as the first 3, actually. I actually literally considered it as on the same level of quality as the other 3, and the way I would say it is that the Toy Story 3 was conclusion, while Toy Story 4 was an epilogue to Woody's story. That's how I viewed it. And it still sort of is epilogue to Woody's story. I mean, sort of, because he plays a big role in Toy Story 5, at least on screen, but yeah, that's how I considered it when I first watched it in theaters. An epilogue to Woody's story. But upon more time of watching it, because I rewatched it recently to get ready for Toy Story 5, and ultimately, well, I do think it's pretty harmless, and I can't call it really insultingly bad like I can talk about most franchises nowadays, these days. I never consider it necessarily bad, but the thing is, it just ultimately kinda boring. I mean, yeah, it's welcome to see Woody reunite with Bo Peep and all, but ultimately, I find most of the movie just quite boring, simply, and nowhere near in quality to its 3 predecessors. And especially that how most of beloved characters are very much sidelined, with practically only Woody and Buzz and Bo Peep playing a big role, with most characters simply just being relegated to secondary status and all. But I'm not one of those people who just hates on Toy Story 4. I think that it's by no means a bad movie, and there are things to enjoy here, and I do think it has several good moments. And I said it feels like an epilogue to Woody's story, and honestly, the more I think about it, yeah, that's how I feel about it. Do I think it should be part of canon or not? Well, this is one of those movies that I could go either way. I don't mind being part of canon, I don't mind not being part of canon, because either way, ultimately, the way I see Toy Story 4, it's a harmless epilogue to Woody's story. Nothing else. Several good parts, but nowhere near the quality of its 3 predecessors. Because coming in number 5, on the other hand, is the sequel to Toy Story 4, and that's Toy Story 5. And yeah, I think that while Toy Story 5 actually has a lot in common with Toy Story 4, I actually think it's a much better story. Like, lots of people are complaining that now Jessie basically became a main character, but I don't think that was a bad thing one bit. If anything, I actually think it very much worked organically well for the narrative, and I really loved that. Like, especially there was actually one really emotional moment actually that just kind of hit me personally, relating to Jessie and her first owner Emily actually. And yeah, this is the moment that really hit me personally, since I have a sister who has a 7-year-old daughter. I talked about them quite a lot on this channel. But also another thing I really liked in this movie, I also do like how it very much referenced the original trilogy, whereas Toy Story 4 certainly did very much allude to events happening in the previous movies. In many ways it was mostly a story about Woody and his relationship with Bo Peep, but Toy Story 5 makes plenty of references to the original trilogy, especially Toy Story 2. I mean, it's Jessie's story after all. But I also like that it actually was in many ways a more human story from the previous 4. Whereas previous 4 very much focused on the toys, Toy Story 5 in many ways the human story here was just as important. And I've seen some people complaining about it, not really liking it, but I very much disagree. I actually think that integrating a human story more into it and making more of a human story actually puts a new fresh on a story and actually gives us something new, original, and reinforces that humans in this world are basically as important as the toys, and the toys live for them. So yeah, the fact that the human story mattered a lot more here in Toy Story 5 not only didn't bother me, it's actually worked for me very well in this movie. But also, I just like also the idea about how kids often these days get addicted to tech and start neglecting their toys, whereas toys actually are good for them and very much contribute their creative imagination. Like, I really love that. Admittedly though, it does feel like it comes like almost 10 years too late at this point, because the whole idea of tech overtaking the world has something that's been talked for like over 10 years at this point. So in some ways it does feel like this movie with this talk does kind of almost like basically 10 years too late, but better late than never, I guess. And one more thing I gotta also say about Toy Story 5 actually is that, actually not about Toy Story 5, I mean the development of technology in general, that now far bigger problem around the world is AI actually than technology. Like, kids getting addicted to technology is kinda a phase that we've sadly moved on past to a worse stage of AI, but that's a controversial subject I'm not getting further into, but whatever. Again, let's just say I think the idea of kids getting addicted to technology and basically neglecting their friends and toys and just focusing on their iPads, I think it's a very fascinating subject that very much fits into the themes and general stories of Toy Story. Again, it just came a couple of years too late. But once again, better late than never. And now we're getting into the original 3 Toy Story movies, because all of them are really amazing animated movies. And once again, actually my number 3 and number 2 are almost tied up, and I'm actually kind of going back and forth. Today I'm in the mood to put them this way and you're about to see what I'm talking about, but my number 2 and 3 very much go back and forth, and both are very, and I mean very nostalgic to me actually, like almost equally nostalgic. I guess my number 2 is slightly more and we'll get to it, but again, my number 3 and number 2 very much go back and forth which one I prefer, because both of those movies are really amazing and both very much are my childhood. Because number 3, and I decided to go with Toy Story 2 for number 3. And yeah, like, this movie is a really amazing movie, and it's very much what a true good sequel can be. Like very much build up on the story that you created in your original movie and very much expand on the interesting concept. Because what worked very well about the original Toy Story is this idea that the toys basically come to life when humans started looking and live their own lives and are friends with each other and all. But Toy Story 2 very much kept its concept, but then very much brought some really interesting new ideas about that kids are growing up and eventually they will outgrow their toys and all. And in many ways this is such a relatable story, because we've all been at that phrase at some point. I mean, this is the way I'm looking at the movie right now as a full-grown adult, because as a kid, actually, you kind of look at the movie differently. As a kid, you're just excited to see all the toys walking, and then Buzz Lightyear's fight with Zurg, and all, like, those are the things you get excited as a kid. But now as an adult, you actually very much notice very different things about the movie that you actually don't notice as a kid. And those are really interesting and fascinating themes that Toy Story explores. But in general, I think it's just a great story about Woody being kidnapped by this guy, Al McQuiggan, and then supposedly being taken to the... I mean, not being taken yet, but then Al plans to sell Woody to the museum in Tokyo together with several other toys of his Roundup gang. And then the whole story of Woody being from this animated show, Woody's Roundup, was quite interesting, and it also introduces us to new characters of Jessie and Bullseye and Stinky Pete, and they are all really great characters. And once again, even though as a kid it was my favorite scene and now I'm an adult, but it's still a very great scene. I think it's really amazing. Buzz's fight with Zurg is still great. I mean, as a kid you look at it very differently than as an adult, but it's still quite cool. And the whole "No, Buzz, I am your father" is a really awesome Star Wars reference. And in general, again, Toy Story 2 is also the very second movie in my life that I've seen in theaters, so that also very much makes it very nostalgic to me. In general, I think Toy Story 2 is a really great sequel, and the only reason it's number 3 is because the following two are just that good. Because number 2 is the very original Toy Story. And yes, I said that Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 1 are both very nostalgic, but considering I've seen Toy Story 1 first, actually, and watched it a lot on my VHS as a kid before seeing Toy Story 2 in theaters, I guess I will go that Toy Story 1 is a little bit more nostalgic still. And in addition to being so nostalgic, and very much anytime I put it on and watch it, I feel almost like I'm going back in time to my childhood. But also, it's just this movie that very much introduces us to the world of the talking toys and Toy Story, of toys just again talking around and being friends with each other and living their own lives while their owners aren't looking. I'm sure we all as kids had this imagination, like I certainly did when I was a little kid, and then would always wonder, wow, what are my toys talking whenever I'm leaving my room? And then and in addition to that, I also like how very much the character development between Woody and Buzz, because this is something that again as a kid you don't really pay much attention to, but really the heart of this movie is the character development and the friendship between Woody and Buzz. Because Woody is very much at first, although Woody is presented at first as a leader of the toys and well-respected man, but then when Buzz becomes Andy's favorite toy, you can see Woody becomes very jealous and does some pretty dark, morally questionable things at best, actually. But then by the end, even though they start out as rivals and very much hate each other at first, at the end they become very best friends. And I think that this character development is just so amazing and so well done. Overall, Toy Story is the very original one, and even though as a kid I did actually think Toy Story 2 was better when I watched them both in theaters, and again they're still very much comparable in quality, but ultimately just because of this wonderful friendship between Woody and Buzz, considering also that, combined with the fact that Toy Story is also the most nostalgic and the very first Toy Story movie I've seen and watched a lot, that's why I ultimately had to go put Toy Story above Toy Story 2. But trust me, both are really amazing movies and both are very much nostalgia to me. But coming in number 1, and this shows that sometimes nostalgia isn't everything, because my number 1 is Toy Story 3, and that ain't ever changing. Like, Toy Story 3 is simply incredible, and this is like one of the best third movies in the trilogy ever, because honestly, once again, Toy Story 3 is incredible. I watched the movie when I was 15 years old, that's when the movie came out, but what worked so well back then, and I still think it works now, is that it's by far easily the darkest of all the Toy Story movies, and easily the most emotional one too. But that's the thing. What works so well about Toy Story is that this is a perfect example of how to respect your original audiences, because it's clear that the movie wasn't really done with modern kids in mind. No, it was actually done very much with the original audiences who very much loved the first two movies as kids, like me back then actually, because I was again 15 years old when Toy Story 3 came out actually, so I was very much in that category, and that's why the movie worked so well, because once again, the priorities were not the kids, quite the opposite. The priorities were actually the childhood audiences of the first two movies, and overall the story is great. The whole idea of that Andy is going now to college and doesn't know what to do with his toys makes perfect sense, considering that once again, vast majority of audiences were either students freshly off to college or again, mid-teens who although weren't going to college yet, but were about to go in a couple of years, because again I was 15, and yeah, that alone I think was a perfect choice by making Andy a freshman in college actually who doesn't know what to do with his toys. And then also Lotso is by far easily my favorite Pixar villain and one of my favorite animated villains as a whole. Like, he's so evil, because I love this contrast. On one hand, a very cute pink teddy bear, but on the other hand, what an evil monster he is.
Lotso? The guy may seem plush and huggable on the outside, but inside, he's a monster.
So yeah, that other thing I really love about Toy Story 3. Lotso is a really incredible villain, and overall, it's just a really amazing story, and once again, Toy Story 3 is not only my favorite Toy Story movie, but actually it's possibly my favorite Pixar movie. Either Toy Story 3 or Coco. It goes back and forth with what is ultimately my favorite Pixar movie, but yeah, either Toy Story 3 or Coco, but doesn't change the fact that ultimately Toy Story 3 is easily still the best of all the Toy Story movies, among the best Pixar movies, and among the best conclusions in the trilogy. And I don't blame people saying that that's when the franchise should end, because Toy Story 3 objectively was such a really perfect conclusion. Again, great story, great evil villain, the characters very much being themselves, and most importantly, the creators respecting their original audiences, and that's why you have such a great animated movie in the trilogy, and that's why Toy Story 3 is still easily the best one in the series. So, folks, here we have my ranking of all 5 Toy Story movies. What is your ranking of the Toy Story movies? Do you agree with my ranking? Comment below, let me know, please subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you soon in another video. Talk to you later, bye!